Cool. So yeah, I just wanted to talk to you guys a bit today about this really cool tool that we learned about in a workshop at uni the other day. It's called En-ROADS. It's basically like an online interface where you can see the impact and effectiveness of different climate change strategies and policies on a global scale. But first, I just wanted to talk a bit about why I think it's so useful and a bit around like the background behind it. So this graph here is called the hockey stick graph. It's quite famous, so you might have seen it like on the news or in a newspaper or something. And it shows the global average surface temperature of Earth over the last 1,000 years. And this black line here is just the 1960 to 1990 average temperature, just for reference. And you can see here around the turn of the 20th century, temperature started rising really fast. And it's like much faster than we've ever seen before. So scientists have used these things called climate proxies, so things like tree rings and ice cores that date back really far. And they found the temperature for the last 2 million years. And we've never seen temperatures change this fast. So we've seen temperatures this hot before because the Earth just goes through like natural cycles of when it's a bit warmer and a bit colder. But we've never seen change happen this rapidly, which is what's the worrying thing. So 97% of scientists now think that this is caused by humans and human activities. So it's mostly due to like a massive increase in the level of greenhouse gases that we've emitted into the Earth's atmosphere. So these are things like carbon dioxide and methane. So after the Industrial Revolution, we started like emitting these at a really fast rate, which has caused the Earth to warm because they absorb more of the sun's radiation instead of the radiation just like bouncing off Earth and back into space. So yeah, we think global temperatures have increased by about 0.5 degree so far, which doesn't sound like a lot, but any like change to the Earth system can have some really like big effects on lots of things. So like extreme weather events and biodiversity, and it sort of like gets the ball rolling for even more change, like a chain reaction. So now we know that we want to do something about this and we want to stop this really fast trend, but predicting future temperature change can be really hard and it's a lot less certain. So we don't really know how humans are going to behave in the future and like what new technologies might be invented or whether they have really high emissions or really low emissions. Even things like population growth, like really high population growth is predicted in Southeast Asia and Africa over the next century. But we don't really know to what extent that might be. And on top of this, like economic growth and development, that will have an impact on emissions as well. So there's so many things to think about that like might impact the total level of emissions in the atmosphere. So a group of experts from loads of different countries called the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have like created these scenarios called RCPs. So that's the representative concentration pathways. And it's basically called that because they're based on the concentrations of greenhouse gases that will be in the atmosphere. So there's 4 in total, and they're here on this graph. So 2.6, 4.5, 6, and 8.5. Those numbers are based on how much warming might occur under that climate change scenario in watts per meter squared, but we usually just talk about them in the like temperature change that will occur by 2100. So it's compared to the temperature before the Industrial Revolution, so 1850 to 1900. So we call this the pre-industrial temperature. So you can see on this graph here that, for example, this is RCP 8.5, and it's predicted that it might increase temperatures by 4.8 degrees compared to pre-industrial temperatures. Scientists now think that that's like a bit unrealistic, so that's a good sign. And then, for example, the other one, so this is RCP 6, and it would be about 3.1 degrees of change. RCP 4.5 would be about 2.5, and then RCP 2.6 would be just under 2 degrees. So that's the one we're actually aiming for. We're aiming for RCP 2.6 because scientists think in order to like significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change, we should try and stay below 2 degrees of warming by 2100 compared to the pre-industrial temperatures in 1850 to 1900. So this international agreement is called the Paris Agreement. You've probably heard of it, it's always in the news. It was adopted at the 21st UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was held in Paris, so that's why it's called that. And 189 countries have signed it so far, as you can see on this map now. And America's in yellow because it's rejoining, so that's really good news. So the UK have signed this, and in order to meet their targets, the government has committed to reducing emissions by 100% by 2050 compared to the 1990 levels. And they also want to meet net zero emissions, which means everything we emit, we also have to offset the same amount. So there will be some like unavoidable emissions, such as like airplanes and agriculture, but we can offset these by, there's like a few ways you can do that. So there's negative emissions technologies, which is things like capturing emissions and then burying them in the ground, basically, so they don't go into the atmosphere. Or it can be more like natural techniques, such as like planting more trees or restoring landscapes that typically draw in a lot of CO2, like peatlands. However, the UK doesn't yet have a full comprehensive strategy on how they're going to do that. So this is where the simulator comes in. So the En-ROADS Climate Change Solution Simulator allows us to try like a combination of different solutions that we think might work, and we can see their effect on the overall temperature change in 2100 on a global scale. So yeah, I thought I'd show you how to use it a bit, and then maybe you guys could like suggest some things you might think reduce emissions and therefore might reduce temperature change. So yeah, I will stop sharing my screen for a second and get the simulator open, and then I can share my screen again and show you guys. I'll also send the link in the chat in case you guys want to have a look at it. But I wondered if anyone had any questions so far.
For those, what are they called? ER? I can't remember the predicted.
Oh yeah, the RCP ones, yeah.
Yeah, the RCP. Are the squiggly lines error bars, or is it?
Yeah, so they're just, so they've used loads of different models to predict what the RCPs might be based on the emissions. And each model has like a different prediction for it. And the thick line is like the average of those model predictions, basically, because it's really uncertain what's going to happen in the future.
Oh, I see. It's the average of multiple. Cool.
Yeah.
I was also wondering, and you might not know at all, but you said obviously like one of the big things is the fact that there's such rapid change. If the temperature, so is it, I think, was it just below 2 degrees? I think you said it's like the best case scenario if we can kind of keep it to that. If we keep it to that, is there points past 2100 or however in the future that temperature could rise, but if it's maintained to be more stable, it's not as like detrimental, if that makes sense? So like over time there might be like a trend that it does really increase, but because it's maybe not as rapid, like there's maybe more chance to like adapt. Yeah, I think stuff.
It takes quite a long time for the temperature to react to like the emissions, so it probably will still continue to increase a bit past 2100, but if we keep it to 2 degrees now with our actions now, it won't increase that much. Whereas with the other scenarios, it might increase a bit more past 2100, but we haven't really looked past then much yet.
Okay, no, that makes sense.
Cool, so I'll get up the simulator. So this is it here. So what we have on this side is just, so global sources of primary energy. So this is like where we're headed now. So we'd have this much coal, this much oil, this much gas, this many renewables, that kind of thing. And then this one is showing the net emissions between 2000 and 2100 as well. And then this over here is just showing the predicted temperature increase by 2100. And then all of these sliders down here, you can change different things basically and like pretend to implement different policies. And if you go on here, you can see different examples of what might happen. So for example, having hybrid cars or better public transport or electric vehicles or taxing coal and subsidizing renewable energy, that kind of thing. So yeah, I thought we'd just have a play around to see if anyone has any ideas on what might help.
Wait, what does afforestation mean?
So afforestation is just planting trees, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we plant some trees, please?
Yeah, of course. We'll see how much that helps. So that changes the temperature by a little bit.
Wait, how much did it change it by?
It changed it by, can you guys see the temperature? It changed it by 0.1, I think.
Damn, okay.
Yeah. So not as much as we might think it would. Anyone else have any ideas?
What about a carbon price on increasing the bottom left energy supply?
Bottom left. Oh yeah, good idea. So you can actually as well, if you click on these 3 dots, you can change more specifically. So you can say like exactly how much you think carbon might be per ton. But yeah, we've just put it to very high now, and that's gone down a lot. It's gone down by a whole degree.
Wow.
That's the thing with the carbon price, it's going to have to be unilateral. Otherwise, you just offset it to China.
Yeah, it's true. But yeah, we could like subsidize renewables, so people are really keen to do that. But that hasn't actually seemed to help that much.
But I guess it's probably because the carbon tax is already so high.
Yeah, that's true. We could increase the energy efficiency and electrification of transport as well. That makes it go down a bit.
I'm going to see what's going to happen if we reduce population, because there's this stuff going on about population reduction. People not
let's have a look
anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so lowest growth would be like this, because I think it's inevitably going to increase, but the lowest growth would be like the best case scenario, so the least many more people, if that makes sense.
Does it? What is the growth rate for the lowest growth? Does it tell you?
You can probably look at it here. Yeah, so this would be having 9.1 billion people in 2100, and then if we had normal, it would be 10.9.
You had like a crazy. Okay.
Yeah. So we can make that really low. But yeah, we're almost there, to be honest. We just need to really increase the price of carbon. And then this slider here would be things like carbon capture and removal, and bioenergy and carbon capture. So I'm actually writing an essay about bioenergy and carbon capture at the moment. It's basically like you grow biofuel, so it's basically plants that you burn to create energy. So when the plants are growing, they draw in CO2 from the atmosphere, so like they remove it from the atmosphere, and then when you burn them to produce the energy, if you capture all the carbon dioxide that they produce in burning, you're removing all of the carbon that they had already like drawn in. So it's like a negative emissions, which is really cool. So we could like increase that loads. But yeah, we're already at 1.8, which is good. But you can go into like quite a lot of detail with all of these things, which is really fun. But yeah, that's pretty much all. I don't know if anyone had any more questions or anything.
Issy, yeah, it's not really like a question, what in a way it is, but I know like on the Paris Agreement you just shown, a few countries haven't agreed to it, and these are really cool countries in my opinion. Countries like India and China and Iran and Iraq, and God knows what happened on the war and everything. But yeah, what do you think about this? Like, if everyone everywhere else is trying as much as possible and doing all these wonderful things, and of course they're not doing their part, do you think that the impact is going to be, I don't know, how do I frame this? Is this going to be us just doing our own thing and then we're brought down, or we're not going to reach the target just because they're not agreeing to do the same?
Yeah, so some countries haven't agreed to it because they don't think it's a big enough target. So it's not legally binding, which means if we fail to like, if countries fail, then there's no like repercussions, or people can just drop out and stop trying, basically. So a few of the like small Pacific Island states didn't sign it because they don't think it's good enough, basically. And some countries just didn't sign it because I don't really know the other reasons why some countries didn't sign it, but there's enough countries that it could be really effective.
Did China sign it?
They did,
so,
unfortunately, and that's just one of the things, like China and Russia and these countries, and we know what they're capable of doing. You know, the population as well.
Yeah.
But I guess that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because like we've already been through industrialization and we're in like the post-industrial economy. So effectively what they're doing right now is rapidly going through the period of industrialization that we've already seen. So like how much should we restrict that? Like, is it in our rights? I know that obviously climate change is a big deal here and we should look to limit it, but also like we've already been through that and we've already polluted the atmosphere massively through our own industrialization period. So how can we manage both their ambition to become post-industrialized with the need to also manage the climate emissions as well?
Yeah, it's also a bit hypocritical because I think we import a ton of our, or like equivalently import our CO2 emissions from China because we import all our goods from there. So we get like, it's not officially UK pollution, but it kind of is.
And what lots of big companies are doing at the moment, so there's this thing called cap and trade. So like companies are allowed like a certain amount of carbon emissions, and then they can trade them. So what quite a lot of them are doing is trading them with like developing countries, so they can pay to offset their own emissions in developing countries instead of just stopping what they're doing and stopping polluting as much, which I think is a bit weird. But yeah, so yeah, there's lots to think about, but yeah, have a play around with it if you want. Yeah, I guess I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Nice.
Yes, I was gonna say, it's interesting to see like how, especially planting loads of trees, how it actually doesn't have like the desired effect that we would think. And like a lot of people kind of going, oh, we're planting these trees, like businesses of, if you buy this, we'll plant trees and stuff, but actually thinking, obviously that's great that they're doing that and it's better than them not doing it, but are we then buying into that thinking, oh, we're doing something really good, but actually it's not enough? And that we need to be doing more than that to actually make an impact.
I think there's more carbon that's taken from the sea, like with algae blooms, than there is from like the Amazon or something like that. Some weird, you wouldn't think it.
Yeah. One of my housemates is doing a research master's on algae blooms in the oceans and like their impact on climate and stuff. It sounds so interesting. But yeah, I think there's lots of, sorry, you can ask a question.
Is that in a good way or in a bad way?
Yeah, so there's lots of like ideas about this thing called geoengineering. So basically how we can use technology to alter the climate and like prevent climate change or slow it down. And one of the ideas is basically fertilizing the oceans. So these like algal blooms and phytoplankton grow a lot because then they draw in loads of CO2 and it holds it in the ocean. And it can take it down to the deep ocean and keep it there for like hundreds of years.
Yeah, but the thing with the zooplanktons is they're like made of carbon. I don't know, it's like calciferous something, and it's like, I think it's calcium carbonate or something. So they have that already. And when they're there, I don't know if like they decay or something. And this is how the carbon kind of like gets absorbed in the ocean or something. So I think that's what really attributes the sea and, you know, all that stuff to producing carbon. So I don't know, we're going to take all the zooplanktons because they're so vital to the ecosystem.
Yeah.
You know, that's another.
Yeah, what tends to happen, which is good, is when they die, they sink down into the ocean, and then the carbon dioxide that's released at the bottom of the ocean, it like circulates around the bottom of the ocean for like thousands of years. So we don't really see it for a really long time.
So if they could probably like trap it or something and then convert some sort of energy, that'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, well, they're trying to trap like emissions at the moment and just store them underground and like under the sea, which sounds a bit scary because if one of them burst, it probably wouldn't be very good. But
yeah, but one thing we're not talking about is how expensive all this is going to be, aren't we?
Yeah. I think most scientists think now that it would be more expensive not to act now because the effects in the future will be really bad if we don't act now.
Some big investment funds have said to their companies like be sustainable because that is the not the good thing to do. It's just that's good business rather than ethical. Yeah.
So there's lots of like discussion around climate adaptation versus climate mitigation. So adaptation would just be like changing the way we live to fit in with the changing climate, whereas mitigation would be preventing the change in the first place. So that would be like the better route to go down because then we don't have to really change our buildings and everything. But yeah.
And would you say, Issy, from your research, that the parties of like the government or the businesses or the people, which of the three do you think could have the most impact if they acted more in the environment sector?
I think businesses probably. But then I guess the government does have a responsibility to sort of promote the right kind of business activities. But I think, actions from anyone just all add up. And I think there's not like one big solution that we can all do to make it all better. Like, I think it's just loads of little actions adding up and like loads of small scale things adding up. And then the government like figuring out how to meet their net zero target, for example, would be like a really good step in the right direction. But yeah, I think it's just like loads of different behaviors adding up.
I guess it's probably also implementing a bit of nudge theory, isn't it? While bringing some systems that basically assist businesses to make the right decisions. So the carbon tax, the everything else, like building a framework, a kind of game where they can play within and effectively be good because it's incentivized to do that.
Yeah. And I think that is starting. So I'm doing a project at the moment about the government is going to make it necessary for companies to report their like climate related financial disclosures. I think I was talking to you about this the other day, Sammy.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. And yeah, so, I mean, that's just like a way to get businesses to think about their carbon footprint and like their risks in like the future to do with climate change and stuff. So I think that's definitely a good step.
Nice. So getting there step by step, but
yeah.
It's time to see it.
It's looking up.
I think is it the one about the B Corporation?
Sorry, the what?
The B Corporation. It's kind of like a new movement going on, like companies that are like really, really interested in social and environmental concerns, really.
Oh, I've never heard of that, but that sounds really interesting.
Check it out. It's more popular in the United States. So if you're a certified B Corporation, you're basically a company that prioritizes social and environmental concerns with profit making or something like that. That's just the idea of it.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really
and Issy, in your opinion, from what you've learned, would you say it's doable, or do you think that it will happen and it will be able to be kind of maintained and actually meet those targets that we want? Or do you think that there needs to be like some real, like, obviously there needs to be radical change, but do you think it's kind of like it's not going to happen, if that makes sense?
I'd like to think it was doable, but I do think there needs to be some like big steps forward. And I think it's all been like put off a bit because of COVID. So like people's focuses have changed a lot. And it's really hard for like climate scientists to get their points across to the like decision makers at the moment. So it feels like there's not very much progress happening at the moment, but hopefully in the next few years we'll see a lot. So I think it could happen.
Although at the same time, I suppose, because like all these countries have been affected by COVID, like they're having to rebuild their economy. It's almost, there could be like the kickstart of, okay, if we're going to rebuild it anyway, we might as well rebuild it green. Like, you know, like it's kind of almost, I hope it has the kickstarting effect that it does kickstart that and try and do it in a green way rather than maybe just carrying on as usual and then eventually getting to a point where we have to kind of change things.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely like an opportunity for people to change their behaviors. And I think it's really interesting to see how like little individual behaviors are starting to affect big companies, and like even just like fast fashion, for example, loads of people are just starting to not buy it as much. And like big fashion companies are sort of changing their business model a bit. So like Zara have their new like eco-friendly range, and like just like little things like that to make people think about it in their day-to-day lives. It's really good, I think.
Issy, I'm starting to see a lot of weird green stuff. I won't lie. Like I'm seeing shoes, you know. I know at some point it might just be a fad. Like these stuff, especially when they start getting commercial value, some companies might just get really cheeky and be like, oh, this is green, or this is green, this is organic. You know, it just becomes a new thing. Like, oh, we just want more money. It's probably not green, but yeah, we'll just put the label on there so you can buy stuff.
Yeah, I think you do have to be careful when something calls itself like sustainable or green, and actually like look into how much it actually is.
In organic shoes, I'm like, what's going on?
What does that mean?
Shoes, come on.
Yeah, hopefully it's not a fad though. Hopefully.
Yeah, because there's the issue with moral licensing. They do something that's sustainable. They feel really good about themselves, and then they just, you know, that gives them the excuse to do whatever they want in you know, other realm.
Yeah.
What's the most sustainable brand that you would like, in your opinion? Like,
it was the one I mentioned last night. Actually, it's Estrid. They just make like women's razors, but they're just like really eco-friendly, and they use all like sustainable materials, and it's all vegan and cruelty-free, and they offset all of their like shipping emissions and stuff like that. And I was just like reading on their website the other day, and I just thought it was a really nice company. But there's so many like eco-friendly companies that are starting now, like Tala, like that kind of, like loads of like new sustainable clothes brands and things. But yeah, I don't really have a favorite company yet. I need to do some more research.
Nice, awesome. I think that probably wraps up. But yeah, thank you for that, Issy. That was really good. I'll just pause the